So I was made redundant and I thought I'll go back to Bristol, which is what I did. And I started my own small business. Without my wife being as supportive as she is, there's absolutely no way that I could do this job properly. And you do it in a way that they've been doing for 300 years. And that sense of history and formality is so different from any other walk of life. There's nothing else I can think of that would have that.
Welcome to episode 4 of The Man Behind the Mason. In this episode, I sit down with Joe Davis, Provincial Grand Master, leader of Freemasonry in Bristol, and custodian of the way we do things in Bristol. Just like the other episodes, we talk about Joe's life outside of Masonry, but I also wanted to really delve into what it takes to be a Provincial Grand Master, how the roles changed over the years, and what challenges we face in the future. Please remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and I hope you enjoy this video enough to hit the like button. Thanks for doing this, Joe.
You're very welcome.
Provincial Grand Master, I suppose for people that don't know, that's the leader of Freemasonry in Bristol.
Yeah, I think the way we're describing it these days is the head of Freemasons in Bristol.
Right.
Slightly easier for the general public to understand what a PGM is.
And I suppose also a custodian.
True. There are a number of extra roles that come alongside that. For example, I'm chairman of the board that owns the building, or the company that owns the building. And that, not surprisingly, is quite onerous in the sense that we have a Grade 2 listed building that actually requires a huge amount of upkeep and continuous appraisal of quite the condition it's in.
Yeah. So let's go all the way back to before Masonry, before Provincial Grand Master. Growing up, are you Bristol?
No, I'm not Bristol.
Oh.
My parents were both from Fishponds, and my father left Bristol after the grammar school in Oxford to pursue his career. And my brother was born in Bridgend. My father then moved back into England, and I was born in Worcester. We spent most of our early childhood in either London or in Essex, and that's where I was at school for most of my career.
Wow.
And then they moved back to Bristol, and I found out where they'd gone, so I tracked them down. And so I lived with them through university years. And then I spent a while in London and then came back to Bristol.
Did you go to university in Bristol?
We called it Bristol Polytechnic in those days.
Oh, right. UWE yes. Now, is that right?
Correct. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yes, I read a degree in finance and accounting, which seemed the right thing to do at that time. Later, after spending quite a few years either as an accountant or as a finance director, I realized actually that wasn't where I should be at all. I should be doing something else completely. Hence why I'm a gardener now.
Did you focus in a specific industry in finance then, or did you?
No, I was finance director of an advertising group. I did that for 5 years. And then at the end of the 80s, life became quite difficult in advertising and indeed the economy generally. And so I was made redundant and I thought I'll go back to Bristol, which is what I did. And I started my own small business, which expanded a little bit to involve IT because personal computing had really taken off at that time. And
was this still 80s or into the 90s?
Early 90s. And then from that involvement, I got involved in the brand new government organisation, Ofsted.
Right.
And we set up a business to support schools inspectors. And 6 years later, we were inspecting 2/3 of the schools in the country. So it grew quite well. And we then joined a bigger group called Tribal Group, and I worked with them for another 4 years after that.
And so do you feel you were always entrepreneurial then? Do you feel looking, I've seen this with finance people in the past, especially when they work in various different companies in finance, they start to see how these businesses are working or not working, and starting to see that actually the finance is such a critical role of a business, they could probably do it themselves.
I think the first part of that is absolutely true, that you tend to understand the real dynamics of a business through looking at numbers. I don't think many of us can necessarily run those businesses better, but we certainly have ideas. And if you don't take those ideas and do something with them, then actually you just end up being frustrated.
And was it always the plan to have your own business, do you think? Or was it just an opportunity that came up?
It was an opportunity that came up. I think I'm very happy working in my own environment, but yeah, I think sometimes you feel that the business concept is actually where you want to be, and therefore you'll go with it, whether it's your own business or whether it's somebody else's. On other occasions, neither of those is the case, and you think, no, got to change, do something different.
Yeah. So how did that lead into landscaping?
It was a semi-retirement
Right.
idea. An old university chum of mine came back from New Zealand after many years and said, "Come on, Joe, let's do something different. You've just finished doing your big contracts. Let's do something completely different." So we had a few pints. We thought about it, had a few more, and then we started to explore. His background had been in franchising in New Zealand, and he said, "Why doesn't franchising work better in this country?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Let's find out." So we researched and we did all the franchising shows, and we looked at what was around. And the reality is that compared with America, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries, franchising is way behind over here. There are the big names. You've got McDonald's and various other big names. But in terms of just regular high street stuff, not a lot at all. We both, my business partner at the time and I, had an interest in gardening. And so we started to look at the gardening sector, and hence we started getting into that business. Very sadly, the point at which we decided, yes, push the button, spent a lot of money on lawyers, getting our franchise agreement sorted out, knew exactly how it was going to run. The banking crash happened. There was no finance anywhere. So whilst we had people saying, yes, they were interested, nobody could borrow the £20,000, I think it was at the time, to buy a franchise.
Yeah.
So we just carried on running it as a business. And even today, I'm still cutting grass.
And you've never thought about relaunching the franchise idea now?
No, I think fundamentally, once I got more into it, I recognized that there is a flaw in the franchise concept. And that is, if you have a franchisee who is successful, the only way they can become more successful is by buying another franchise from you. Because their franchise agreement will prevent them from taking on any other aspect of business around that. So you end up with a dissatisfied franchisee, and once that happens, then the whole thing becomes quite torturous. Because the last thing you want to do is enforce the contract agreement, the franchise agreement. That just putting more money into the lawyers' pockets.
So where did the interest in gardening come from? Is that something that you've always been interested in?
Yes, I think so. Even now I can recollect my grandfather in Clevedon building a garden from scratch and being very interested in what he was doing. Then when I had my first house and second house and so on, and you start to get into little bits of it, and you think, okay, so that's how you lay a lawn, and that's how you trim your apple trees, and that's how you do this. And yeah, bit by bit, it becomes a passion.
I suppose there's a big difference between gardening and what you do, by the sounds of it. I mean, I'm used to just cutting the grass, trimming around the outside, and then having a drink.
It's yes, I mean, gardening is a very, very broad term. And when we started the company, it was about garden maintenance, doing exactly what you just described. Mowing the lawn, cutting the edges, making the whole thing look tidy. Over the years, we've got into planting schemes, into hard landscaping, doing complete strip outs and rebuilds, and all of that brings in a whole new raft of skills, which you pick up on the job, really.
So you pretty much full-time with the day job as well, or is it become more of a lifestyle?
It's I certainly wouldn't describe it as a lifestyle. It's not one that you choose. There's daily work that has to be done every day to make sure the team is running well, sorting out a client's problems, looking at payroll, all that sort of stuff needs to be going on. And how that juxtaposes with my Masonic responsibilities is really a mystery to me.
But that's what I'm leading up to, really, is to try, because I've had a bit of an insight into some of the things that go on here, and it blew my mind completely from before I was involved as I am. And I guess, historically, the perception has been that, the person, the head of Freemasonry in Bristol or any province is probably a retired person that has the time to take on the responsibilities. And I was only thinking the other week that I'm not sure how somebody that works pretty much full time can do that job, but also that job must have evolved quite a lot, certainly over the past 2 or 3 years, let alone the past 10, 15, 20 years.
Yes, I think working out precisely what the role of the PGM is something which takes the first 5 or 6 years of your term of office anyway. Because whilst UGLE very kindly put on a PGM school when you first get appointed.
Is there a job description? Do they give you a list of?
It touches on various things, but we in Bristol are quite different in the sense that if we take my opposite number in Hampshire and Isle of Wight, they've got a huge province, thousands of masons, lots of individual halls, and the county is split up into 6 different territories. Here in Bristol, we have a single building and a much smaller province. But actually, all that does is concentrate all the various activities into one person, one place. And if we take the building alone, there's a huge amount of work which needs to be done on a very regular basis, just to make sure that we're doing all the right things. We've got our Bristol Masons charity, and whilst I'm chairman of the committee, most of the work is done by the secretary and treasurer. They do a brilliant job. Nevertheless, there will be emails coming in 2 or 3 a week saying, we've had this application, what do you think about it? And I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I just said, oh yeah, fine. I do actually read them through, do some due diligence. And then there's just I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but it's all the stuff that just goes on in the ether. So that when you walk into the building, somebody will say, oh, Joe, have you thought about our rowing team up in the regatta at Worcester? Have you thought about the classic car drive-it day at the end of April? What do you want to do about such and such? And you suddenly realize there's another 30 things on your to-do list that you hadn't actually got around to doing them all yet. So yeah, it's a busy, busy time.
And how do you deal with that? Because, I mean, I know just from a professional life, that people in an organization, of any organization, everything will be important to that person, but not necessarily as important to the person you're asking to make a decision on something. Yep. So I'm not taking away anything from what's being asked, but it must be quite difficult to manage people's expectations with everything from running a building yep. to the ceremonial side of masonry down to that one small event that's happening in a month's time.
It's prioritizing is key, and I try and cover all the bases. I've got a very good deputy, and I will quite frequently just say, do you mind having a chat with Richard about that? Or have a chat with Phil, Provincial Secretary. It takes it off my list, and it doesn't need too much involvement from me. Nevertheless, some things fall down the pile and will still be in the in-tray in a year's time, I suspect. I do try and get everybody to email me with a particular query or anything they want me to do, simply because I don't remember things. Mm. And I don't think this is a function of age. I don't think I ever remembered everything that I should do. So if somebody says to me, what about the drive-it day? Unless I've got an email that I can go back and look at, I think, yeah, okay. So we're going to do this, this, and this. Off. That's sorted then. But if I had to try and retrieve something from something somebody said to me in the bar, and I have to say I'm not particularly talking about Steve Hall and the Bristol Masonic Classic Car Club, because actually he does a brilliant job running that. It doesn't need my involvement. But I'm just using it as a descriptor. Yeah, so I do try and prioritize in my head, but emails help. And I also have to have a deputy who will nag me as and when he should. That's always useful. But perhaps the thing, just to finish off on that topic, is without my wife being as supportive as she is, there's absolutely no way that I could do this job properly. I mean, she's brilliant. When we first got notified that this was a possibility, she said, if you're going to do this new job here, why have we just sold a house in Lee Woods and moved 12 miles out into the Chew Valley to enjoy the country life? And I said, I don't know that. The answer to that, we'll just have to play it by ear, which is what we've done.
Has it been a shock to her? Because I can imagine that even before becoming the PGM, that you never knew exactly what it entailed. I mean, nobody in any membership organisation ever tells you what the job fully entails, no matter what you're doing.
I think it's probably there's two elements to that. One is that she knew very little about my Masonic life up to that point.
Right.
Not because I'd hid it from her particularly, but we'd never come up in conversation. And even when I was junior warden and was down here a lot of the time, she recognised that was a year's job and it would come to an end and we go back to normal. So when I was asked, would I be considered for it, and she said, obviously I asked her what she thought, and she said, but I know nothing about what Masonry is. So I actually made a point of then going through actually what being a Mason is all about. So she now understands, and if I say I'm going to Dolphin Lodge tonight or Canning's Lodge tonight, they're installing such and such. Oh yes, I remember him because he was on wherever. And so she's now got a good understanding. It helps having a very intelligent wife, I have to say, because I don't have to explain things twice. She just gets it. So she knows what's going on. Incidentally, I did say, well, why don't you join the Lady Masons? Then you'll have an even better understanding. And she said, no, thank you.
That would be interesting. Do you know many Lady Freemasons? I've never met one. I know obviously there are lots of lodges now.
I've met probably half a dozen, and one or two by accident, where I spotted a Lady Mason wearing a square and compasses on a pendant, on a necklace. And I said, that's an interesting pendant. And she looked at me. I said, yes, I'm on the square as well. And we got chatting, but she was a lot more guarded than I'd expected her to be.
Oh.
As the evening wore on, she became a little bit more open, but I would very much like to see a greater interaction between women Freemasons and the craft. I think it's something which takes away a major criticism of the craft, which is that it's for men only, and that's it, full stop. We know that women Freemasons enjoy their meetings and everything else. So why not try and reach out a little bit? We can't, it is quite clear, both organizations don't want to be in amity with each other. In other words, the moment you do that, then we'd be able to visit their meetings, they'd be able to visit ours. Neither organization wants that.
No, I don't think my mum's ladies bowls team wants men to play in their team either. So
I can understand that. So that's not what I'm asking for or looking for. What I would just like is to have a greater recognition of the role each other organization could play. For example, when we try and attract students as joining members, we have in the past gone to the Freshers' Fair. They've now made it ridiculously expensive, there's no point in going. But actually to put on a joint event where we would have the Women's Freemasons and the craft represented and be seen to be not doing exactly the same thing, but doing such similar things and having the same core principles, to my mind, would make a lot of sense. And I'd be even more excited if we actually were approached by a women's lodge to meet here. We haven't got that many slots available, but at lunchtime they could do. And the only time I've had that discussion, the comment was, parking's expensive, isn't it? And I went, well, yeah, it is everywhere. It is if you go shopping. And if you're going to have one meeting a month, maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah. Where is that? Do you know where the nearest?
It's in Bath.
Oh, is it? Not too far then.
No. Also quite expensive to park.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that she was quite guarded, the lady that you'd met, because the one thing that surprised me down here is the different levels of openness amongst members. I'm completely open about being a Mason. Maybe I wasn't initially when I first joined, but quite proud of what we do, especially from a charitable point of view. But I've noticed that people seem to join Masonry and get out of Masonry completely different things. I could probably name 5 or 6 different things that people get out of it.
Yep.
but also the varying levels of openness. Some people, will wear a T-shirt out in public, and some people really don't want people to know they're a Mason. And that's obviously that's up to them. But I find it quite interesting.
It's part of what is essential about Freemasonry is that people come from all walks of life. We've got members who are still in their teens. We've got members who are in their 90s. We've got people who've come up through trades. We've got people who come from very, very wealthy backgrounds. It's that splendid mixture of individuals coming together. And therefore, inevitably, we're going to have different views about how transparent or how open you want to be about your involvement. Personally, I don't think there's any room in the organization for what I'd call secrecy or hiding behind closed doors, other than the ceremony itself, which is part of what's so special. But I can't actually understand why anybody would not disclose they're a Freemason.
No. Well, you haven't got much choice, have you?
Not a lot, no. But I don't think I ever hid it. I mean, I got into Masonry because a friend of mine mentioned in a pub one night, he said, well, Joe, he said, you're quite clubbable. Why don't you become a Mason?
Clubbable?
Clubbable, yeah. I was in Round Table, I was in Junior Chamber, I was in various other things. And so I said, well, what was it all about? And he said, oh, yeah, don't worry about that. He said, I'll put you down.
Was he a Bristol Mason?
He was a Bristol Mason. He resigned from my lodge the first year that I joined,
Oh.
as did my seconder. And actually, when we talk, as we do quite frequently, about how retaining Masons once they've joined is so key to the organization, I could quite easily have actually wandered away if one or two people hadn't taken the time and the trouble just to make me feel very welcome indeed. There's one elderly member of Dolphin Lodge now, John Jones, and he would just spot me across the bar, walking in, didn't know anybody, and he'd make the beeline for me and said, I've got a cigar for you for the after meeting. In those days, we'd smoked in the after meeting. And he said, come and meet so-and-so, and he'd sit me down, and that was it. It was just brilliant. And John Jones is, to my mind, one of the, I wouldn't say he's a dying breed at all, but he was an absolute rock for both the lodge, but all the members that came in around my time, because he did exactly to them what he'd done to me, and that's made them feel very, very welcome. And I often draw the analogy between joining Masons and turning up at a rugby club for your debut match or debut training session. You don't know anybody, but you know all the character types.
Yeah.
And so you do what you do. You run out on the training pitch and you do the best you can. And then you have a couple of beers afterwards, and then people start to chat to you, and then you think, okay, well, I've got a match on Saturday, and then all of a sudden you think, oh, I've got to prepare for that. Just like preparing for a ceremony down here. And the harder you train, the better you perform.
But you only get out of it what you put in.
Absolutely.
And I can't help but feel sometimes when I've seen people that have resigned, and some great people who I'm still friends with have resigned, I can't help but think they've not fully immersed themselves to get the full experience. Otherwise, why would you resign?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And let's face it, it's a fairly long-winded process to join up. You don't just turn up. You have to go through the application, you have to be interviewed, you have to get to know, the lodge has to get to know you, then you get proposed, they vote for you, and then you come in, and you have the splendid ceremonies of your initiation. And to have gone through all of that and come out at the other end and think, actually, that's not really for me. I just find that a little strange.
Yeah.
Now, I know people's lives change quite dramatically on occasion when job or partner or work, not just work, but social life, can all change and shift in a different direction. That's fine. I understand that. But just to think, not to give it a big enough go.
After going through all of that. How do you, what year were you initiated into Masonry?
92.
Have you seen, I mean, I think I know the answer from talking to other people, but how big a change have you seen in Masonry from the 90s?
I think the biggest change is actually the numbers of people that turn up. my recollection, which is a little lazy, but recollection going back to my first year or two, was that the dining room was always seemed to be very full. And we were stewards in those days, so we actually waited table. In terms of everything else, and of course you don't have a particularly broad perspective on what's going on. You're very much focused on your lodge, the lodge meeting, and that's it. It's not a lot that's changed, really. I think walking into the bar these days, I would say, is a slightly more friendly experience than it was 30 years ago. But I think my judgment has just been changed over the years because of being down here as much as I am.
Yeah, there is one change that I've noticed just in the past, I think 2 years, maybe 3 years, is how people seem to be enjoying themselves more. And I don't mean that people didn't like coming and for some reason just kept coming, but the atmosphere seems to be happier. People are not taking some elements of Masonry as serious as they did, still taking ceremony and the things you should take seriously, but rehearsals and some of the other things that go on down there, people just seem to be having a bit more fun.
I think that's exactly right. I find it hard to compare, as I said earlier, with 30 years ago, only because my recollection has started to get a bit hazy. But what I am certainly aware of now, and you can pick it up when you walk in the bar or go into one of the dining rooms, is that there is a lot of chat, a lot of fun. And this is being absolutely positively promoted by the Grand Master, Jonathan Spence. He's actually saying, Masonry should be fun. Why shouldn't it be fun? If you're going to spend a reasonable amount of time doing it, the last thing you want is just to think, oh, what another meeting. It should, as you say, the ceremonial ought to be crisp, professional, precise, not without a glimmer of humour as and when it's appropriate. Because occasionally there's just a moment to take the pressure off, and that's a good thing. But when I first joined, I do recall people saying, so why do you like Masonry compared with Round Table? And I said, well, in Round Table, you have all the fun, but no seriousness, no real seriousness. In Freemasonry, we have the ceremony, which is formal, and you get dressed up appropriately, and you learn lines, and you do movements around the floor and so on. And you do it in a way that they've been doing for 300 years. And that sense of history and formality is so different from any other walk of life. There's nothing else I can think of that would have that, with the exception of the military, probably. But then you finish the meeting, then you have your fun, your chat and everything else. I just think it's a wonderful organisation.
I asked about the fun part because I don't know where it's come from, and I wondered, and so I guess I was hinting at, has that come from, not top down, that's the wrong terminology, but has that come consciously from the provincial executive, the people running the day-to-day of Freemasonry, or do you think it was something that's been wanted for and promoted and generally happened because of that?
I think it has crept in by chance, but if you go back a couple of Provincial Grand Masters, Alan Vaughan was certainly a proponent of enjoying yourself. Certainly Mike Flynn was. I think before that, there were elements that the leadership would have frowned on certain things and were not backward in coming forward about those things. These days, if something isn't being done quite the way it should be, there are subtle ways that we can share that without standing up in lodge and saying, don't do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's taken that sort of, dare I say the word, crustiness away from the executive. It's become more open.
And what do you think the next challenge is then? So, membership seems to be, after COVID, back on heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
People starting to enjoy themselves a bit more. What's the next challenge? And how do you tackle that challenge?
The challenge across Freemasonry in the whole is slightly different from the challenge we face here in Bristol. we are a younger average age province than the vast majority of provinces. By and large, our lodges are slightly healthier. By that I mean number of members. Our challenge here in Bristol is very much about trying to re-engage with those members who, post-COVID, still haven't felt that they should be coming down. And quite a few of them may have just thought, I've lost interest. I haven't missed it. I won't be going down, without actually examining what it is that they had beforehand. They just got into a particular position. Now, I think not all, but a good proportion of those could be encouraged to come back in. So that's the first challenge. Second challenge, or part of the challenge, is to say we are now starting to bring quite a lot of new members in, new entrants. I want to make sure that every single one of those new entrants is given every opportunity not to drift away. And that's down to the lodge. The lodge has to look after its newer members in a way that I don't think has been done particularly well in the past. And I'm always generalizing, because some lodges do lots of things really, really well, but not all by any means. And, so therefore, that challenge of, once we've got Masons in, how do we nurture them? How do we look after them? How do we engage their interest for a long time into the future? Because I've already said I've been over 30 years. How long have you been in?
2014, I think.
Okay.
It's not very long, really.
Just a youngster.
Thanks.
But you have embraced it in the sense that you've got involved.
Well, my philosophy is don't do anything unless you're prepared to chuck yourself in. You say about the ceremonies, which is fine, but I couldn't think of anything worse than coming down here and just sitting down watching and not having a job.
Yep.
And then potentially not even staying for a meal and a drink and, like you said, the fun bit after. It would. I think if I found myself doing that, I probably would be one of those people that doesn't come anymore, because I think, what's the point? And that's why I say I think the people who leave just haven't fully experienced it.
Yeah.
It's obviously not about it's not about bringing in new members and doing what we can to make sure they stay. It's about making sure they have the full experience, because when people have the full experience, they don't want to leave.
By and large, they don't leave. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I suppose, going back to, you asked me what the challenge is facing the province, I think that the last element is the bit that it shouldn't be an afterthought, because it's actually so central to everything we do, and that is our community engagement, which really has two strands. One is the monies that we collect and give away to local charities, which is a phenomenal figure. But the other is there's so many opportunities, there are so many opportunities for us to actually get involved in charities in a way that is so much better than just handing over a check. We've got, whatever our membership is today, say it's 1,200 members. We have people with all sorts of talents and experience. And if we could divert those, or trap a database of those skills, and allow groups to come to us and say, look, we need some help with this. It could be planting an allotment or doing something as basic as that. But we've got volunteers who are already doing that sort of thing within our number. And all we would then need to do is just connect the people. And I think if we are seen to be involved in the community better, and we are working hard on this. I mean, it's not something, it's not a zero base. We're actually already doing quite good stuff. Our reputation, or reputation masonry, will actually start to improve. And for some reason, we still are faced with some of the very old tropes of Freemasons. And you've only got to watch TV and you got the same old things cropping up time and time again. And you just think, what do we have to do to actually get the society, get the community to recognize, actually, no, we're not like that.
Yeah.
We are like this. And it's interesting. I talked to various members of the civic community. The High Sheriff, very interesting individual. We got on very well. The Lord Lieutenant, Peaches, is brilliant, and she loves what we do. So bit by bit, we're spreading the word, but that will be a major breakthrough if we could say in 5 years' time, well, we've achieved this because I've got these sort of activities going on that we're connected with.
And is that the goal over the next few years to, obviously to expand the membership, but to get Masons out there more doing things in the communities?
I think we do a lot in terms of our charitable activity, and I think we can extend that into more community-based activities. And to have a lot of fun doing so, and we come back to that word fun. We did a litter pick pre-COVID, which somebody organised, and for the 13, 15 of us out there in a grotty park picking up all sorts of stuff, actually that bit wasn't so much fun, but the camaraderie and the sense that we were doing something for the local community was great fun.
Yeah.
That was good. So yes, I would like to see us do more of that.
And the ceremonial side of things then. So you've got the building, there's obviously all of the charity work that goes on. The more serious bit, the ceremonial bit. Do you manage to get to many lodge meetings yourself?
Yes. I think I probably do 15 Masonic events a month.
Wow.
And I try and get to the installation of a new master. Every time there's a new master, I try to get to those. I also will attend if there's a long service certificate to present, 50 years or 60 years. That's always quite special. Bear in mind, I've only been in for 30 years, so talking to somebody who's been in for 60 years, their sense of history and what's gone on in the province is huge. So that's always a privilege. And I'm also a member of a few lodges, and I do try and attend those whenever possible. So yes, I between the craft and the Royal Arch, I do quite a lot.
Must be quite tough to fit all of that in, plus all of the administration side of Freemasonry and working full time and making sure you've still got a wife.
Yes. Well, we're just in the season now where we travel to other provinces and attend their annual general meetings.
Right.
And my patch, if you like, goes from Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, Wiltshire, Hampshire, West Wales, South Wales, Monmouthshire, Worcestershire, Gloucestershire. And in a sense, that is going to support them on their big day, and they will then come and support us in September for our big day. So that's an important part of the process. But that tends to be a full day out on most of the occasions. I was down in Devonshire on Saturday. On Monday, I was in Birmingham on Saturday, that's right. So yes, on top of those other bits we talked about, then we get the provincial stuff. Next week I'm in London for 3 days for the investiture of Grand Officers. So yeah, there's a lot there, and I return to my theme, and that is without the support of my wife, who looks after my dog when I'm away, it would not be possible.
And how long can you sustain that sort of role? I mean, not that I'm saying that it's so onerous that you don't want to do it, but because when I first joined Masonry, I was told I was actually attending a funeral of a Mason. And somebody said to me, "Oh, that's the Provincial Grand Master." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And they explained. And I think my perception was that the Provincial Grand Master, it was like a monarch. They just carried on, and that was it. I didn't realise that people did a term, and it wasn't until I understood more. So
when I was appointed in 2018, I was given this splendid scroll, which was now seen in the bar, and that role is for 10 years. With a review after 7. My view, therefore, is that I will be appointing a successor. I don't appoint a successor, but a successor will be appointed some point over the next 3 to 4 years.
And you say the review, that's not a case of you reviewing, that's a case of you being reviewed.
London. Well, actually, I think possibly in days gone by, you'd have just kept working until your 10th anniversary, and then they'd have said, right, who do you want to take over?
Right.
These days, there's a little bit more involvement. I think...
I get the feeling it's a bit more professional.
Yes, absolutely right. I think London have worked out that the success of the organisation as a whole depends on an awful lot of strands, and getting provinces to work effectively in all those things I was talking about in terms of a challenge. They need to make sure that the leadership is correct. It's not just about who they appoint in this role, but also who I then appoint as my assistants and people who work next to me. I mean, I know you're well aware, but I'm going to mention it anyway. You know, we have some major important roles in the executive. We have communications, we have membership, finding new members. We have the almoner, looking after our members, health and everything else. We have the provincial treasurer, provincial secretary, running the executive, as it were, in terms of the back office. And then on top of that, we've got all sorts of other interesting little roles that help the whole thing keep moving. And my job, I suppose, is as chief exec, is to make sure that everybody understands the roles they've got and are actually performing. And that's in a volunteer organization, not the same as being in a commercial organization.
Yeah.
So therefore, you have to do it carefully and subtly, but make sure that you're steering the boat in the right direction. And that's what London are looking for. They want to make sure that that approach, that infrastructure is there. So every year I have to write an annual report telling them how well we're doing and what we're going to do better next year. And after a few months, somebody will ring me up and say, "Oh, read your report, very interesting." And they'll challenge you on some of the points you've raised.
Do you find that talking with other heads of Freemasonry in provinces around the country, their roles are very similar, or is it different? Because I can imagine the one thing that struck me, something you mentioned earlier, is obviously all of the Bristol lodges meet in this building.
Yes.
Yet we're one of the smallest provinces. And some of the larger provinces obviously have buildings dotted all around their county or their province. But I would imagine that the provincial executive isn't tasked with managing those buildings. It would be the lodge or group of lodges. And yet those larger provinces have more officers in positions to help run the province. So you've almost got more elements to the PGM role in Bristol with less support. So does the role of a PGM differ in the other provinces?
It certainly differs.
Is it less hands-on, maybe?
I think if we took the elements of the challenge that I described earlier, most of those will be replicated by my peers. But each of them will have their own versions of that. If you take my colleague in West Wales, small province like ours in numerical terms, but it will take him 2.5 hours to drive from his house to the furthest lodge building. And therefore, he will not visit anywhere near as much as I do here, because actually it will be impossible. So similarly in Cornwall, I mean, Cornwall is huge from one end to the other. And if you have to go from Plymouth to Launceston for a meeting, then actually you're not going to get very much else done, are you? That's a big time out. So yes, core elements of the job are the same. How different provinces deal with it is different. The fact that we do also have the building, which is we've already spoken about, is actually quite a big thing. We need to make sure we can fund it.
Yeah.
And it's in good shape at the moment, apart from the leak in the roof, but we've got that on the mend.
On the list.
It's on the list.
And you mentioned about you're visiting the other provinces now this time of year for their AGMs, their I guess Provincial Grand Lodge in their provinces. Ours is in September, so I know ours used to be before September.
Yeah.
Have we kind of split away now? And
no, there tends to be a cycle all the way through the year.
Right.
Post-COVID, we had a natural break because we couldn't get into City Hall in May. The earliest available date was in September. And the May meeting was always, it was part of our sort of diary, but it was always at the end of a year, almost at the end of a year. Whereas I thought when we shifted to September, it's the start of the new year and therefore could give us a real springboard into what we're hoping to achieve. We've only done one full meeting with both chapter and the lodge, Provincial Grand Lodge, and we'll we'll carry on doing it this year. I think it works quite well.
I think it makes sense if because at the Provincial Grand Lodge, you're obviously appointing people for the coming year.
Yeah.
To do it at the end of the year and say these are the people that are going to take us into the new year, have 6 weeks off, seems a bit counterproductive.
Yes, I think there's an element to that as well. And if we can get enough enthusiasm and get enough people to turn up for the Provincial Grand Lodge and carry that enthusiasm away with them back to their lodges, then yes, we will achieve what I had intended.
I was quite surprised that they're obviously very well attended and great events, but I was surprised how many people hadn't come or have never come. And I thought, why would you want to miss?
It's a mystery to me too, which is why we're going to try and push very hard over the next 2 months to get everybody to think, oh yes, I will go this year. And I mean, from my perspective, if I was a Master Mason, say 5 years in a lodge, and one of our senior members was getting his provincial rank, I think, well, yes, I'll go along, I'll support. I mean, it seems to be a no-brainer to me. I remember going along to, it used to be held at the grammar school a few years back, and all the Dolphin members would sit in a long line, and we'd applaud crazy for our man when he went up to get his collar. Occasionally more than one. But, yeah, it's. I think it's a great event, and I think there used to be a bit of a hint that actually it was quite a long meeting, and the PGM would talk forever, and occasionally there'd be another talk given by somebody else, and on a warm May afternoon or morning, it became a bit too much. I do try and limit the meeting to about an hour and a quarter now, which most people should be able to survive.
Yeah.
And I think one of the nice things about it is, I've already mentioned that I go to other provinces. Similarly, we'll have 20 to 30 distinguished guests with their chains, and it's a recognition that we're all part of an organization. It's not just our province. And actually to have that representation up on the stage, I think is a lovely thing. And I enjoy going to other people's because I get to meet Masons from different provinces. And you can actually have a very real conversation with a Master Mason from Cornwall about why he got into Masonry. Does he enjoy it? Does he want to come and visit in Bristol and just see things slightly different? There's some marvelous connections you can make.
Yeah.
As well as the fact that actually the group of Provincial Grand Masters that I go on tour with, as it were.
You sound like a band.
Yeah, no, it's more like a rugby club. I will have been with most of those in excess of 6 years, 7 years, as we sort of go through our periods together. And we meet up best part of 20 times a year, I think.
Is it like having a circle,
Correct.
like when you go in the chair of your lodge?
Exactly the same. Exactly the same, but for a longer period of time.
As much banter?
Lots of banter.
Oh, brilliant.
Yep, and that I suppose we come back to the idea of actually having fun. I go on these away trips because I actually enjoy the company. It's a fun day out.
And of course, we've got lots of people coming to Bristol soon for the ball.
Yeah,
The Masonic Charitable Foundation ball. Bristol's been chosen for that.
Yes, we're co-hosting it with Somerset. Can't claim all the credit for that, but it's the first time the MCF ball has been held outside of London. Ashton Gate is a brilliant venue, as we remember from the end of our last festival ball. And we've got, I think, about 600 signed up for that now. I think Bristol are doing slightly better in selling their allocation than Somerset are, but then if you imagine Somerset as a county, there's an awful lot of people who live way down south,
Yeah.
and coming out to Bristol for a night out is a little bit more than they could anticipate. So, but it will be a great event, superb event.
Are the tickets still available? If people
Tickets
want to-
still available, yeah. There are posters up around the place. And I'll make sure that in the next newsletter we put that out as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think it's been quite insightful, actually, as to understanding not just more about you, but more about the role and what it entails. I honestly think there will be lots of people that don't quite realise. They just think that the PGM, he's that guy that decides, that sometimes he might turn up to our lodge and that's about it. But a lot more involved.
Well, I hope we've covered the sort of topics that you wanted to. I think it's a great concept, man behind the Freemason, and long may it continue. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, Joe.